So why is it the Anglo-Saxon type of economy has been so strong and fast-growing over the last couple of hundred years? What is it about that connection between businesses, farming, land ownership, and banking that has meant that the US economy, the British economy, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and those based on English law seem to have done quite well and grown? What is it about that? Turns out it's the core mechanism that turns New Zealand into not a real economy, but a housing market with bits tacked on. It is the thing that controls how we grow our economy, whether some people become rich or not. And over the last 30 years, that mechanism has been turbocharged and has changed Aotearoa forever. Sometimes in good ways, and for some people it's been fantastic. But on the whole, it has widened inequality and meant that those people who can't use that particular tool are finding it difficult to grow their own businesses, to access capital, and to be a full part of this Anglo-Saxon economy. What is this tool? It is the connection between people and land, and it is banks that define that connection. It is the mortgage. It's a bit of paper. It's a legal construct that connects a bank to the owner, a very clear owner, one or two people, of a particular piece of land, very preferably a very clearly demarcated freehold piece of land. It is the thing that drives Aotearoa. It's good for some, but it needs to change. This week on When the Facts Change, we talk with Teaho Pihama, who is the head of Māori advisory at Kiwibank, about how this mechanism influences Te Ao Māori, strangles opportunities for growth, but could be used to make things so much better. That's this week on When the Facts Change. Well, kia ora, and welcome into the studio here at the Spinoff for a When the Facts Change special with Teaho Pihama. Great to have you in the studio.
Tēnā koe, Bernard. Thank you for having me.
Teaho is the head of Māori advisory at Kiwibank and in a unique position to talk about how a crucial part of our society, our economy, it has an amazing amount of potential, but maybe isn't firing on all cylinders with the current system. And I'm fascinated with the mechanics in how our economy really works and how that plays out in society. Because I have this sort of theory of everything in Aotearoa, which is it's always, always, always about the land and about the people and how they're connected, and in particular, residential land, how we live. Because we have a residential land market valued at $1 trillion. That's 3 times our GDP. 20 to 30 years ago, it was only worth 1 times GDP. And that growth in value relative to what we do as an economy has completely changed our society. It has completely widened inequality. Those who happen to be in control of that land and owning that land at that time, 20, 30 years ago, are now much, much richer than those people who weren't. And I'm really interested in explaining that connection between the land and the people and what it's doing to stop us and maybe how it could help us solve some of our problems. And the thing I'm fascinated with is this core idea in our economy, society, that has been with us since colonialisation, which is that our bank can put a mortgage, a legal construct, on top, layer it over a title, a freehold title preferably, over a piece of land which is owned, and the bank, this is what the bank normally likes, owned by 1 or 2 people. So there's a very clear connection between the land and the people, and the connection is individual ownership of clear title over a clearly delineated chunk of land. That's how the Anglo-Saxon economy works.
Kia ora.
And when you have a series of societal constructs or ways of thinking about ownership, about people and land, which are different from that, there's a problem. And this is why I'm fascinated to start digging into this problem we have at the moment of Māori access to capital. Could you talk about, how that plays out that you can see in our economy and in our communities?
Kia ora. So just a thought that came to mind when you were doing the intro is actually around there are a number of historical contexts that have led us to where we are today. There's also the mindsets. So, to Māori, what is ownership? And, regardless of what you may have on a title, what does responsibility or kaitiakitanga look like? And for us, when we have ancestral land or land that we are guardians of within the cities, within towns that may not be ancestral, the mindset still remains the same. The collective nature of that responsibility that we have back to Papa Tuanuku. So that's a really interesting sort of high-level order in terms of worldview. But then in terms of what we have done more recently is taking a look at actually, how do we enable more people to actually achieve those long-term goals of home ownership? And is there an opportunity for us to focus in on small to medium enterprise and how we go about enabling them to thrive, to grow, to be prosperous, to actually achieve the home ownership goal, rather than what it has been historically, which is, buy the house, build the business, borrow against the house for the business. How can we take a different view in terms of what does securitization look like?
Because our banking system over the years has become increasingly focused on the mortgage on the piece of residential land. There was a time, 100, 150 years ago when a bank was there to serve a business community. It was there to lend money to people in business, not necessarily secured against a piece of land, but secured against the business or the cash flow or a promise from the business owner to make good on the loan. And at one time, our banks, 60, 70% of their business was actually business banking, be it small business, medium business, large business. But that has flipped on its head in the last 20 or 30 years. You could argue that our banks now are much more about being mortgage banks who actually see the world through the mortgage on a piece of residential land and the equity that is attached to a person with an income who can promise to keep paying the mortgage on that piece of land and maybe other pieces of land they've been able to buy with the equity from that. Could you explain for a wider audience how is that different from what we see in Te Ao Māori?
So Te Ao Māori see Papa Tuanuku as our mother, the one who gives us sustenance, and as the people that live on Papa Tuanuku, it's our responsibility to care for the land and the environment. So when we look at giving up our source of sustenance or our Mother Earth as security for some sort of business loan in this more to medium enterprise space, that's quite foreign to the way in which Māori have been brought up within our worldview. In comparison to seeing the whenua as merely an asset, in which, increases in value dependent on sort of economic circumstances that might be out of your control. For Māori, it's more around how do we nurture the land to get the best return on that nurture, whether it be housing, whether it be planting kai, hunting, so on and so forth. But it is very much a give and take relationship.
So, but at the moment, because there isn't that clear title to, one or two people. It might be hundreds of people, thousands of people who are not necessarily living in that particular place. They may be living in the city, or they might be living in another place, or maybe even overseas. The traditional way of, let's say you've got a fantastic idea for a business, and maybe you've even started the business, and you've got a plan, you've got some special talents, you've got people, you've got the idea, and you can see it working, and maybe you've got a track record. Now, normally, I think, well, go to the bank, explain the plan, convince the banker that the cash flow's coming, that the loan can be repaid. Use that loan to, maybe employ people, maybe do some R&D on a product, or come up with a new piece of software or whatever. But at the moment, when you do that, the bank goes, "Oh, good idea. Show me the title to the freehold land you've got." That's about as far as it goes, me being a little bit rude. How do banks adapt to this other worldview, which says the land isn't there as a security for a loan, the land is there to nourish and sustain? Why don't you see the intangible value I've got in my business plan?
Simply, we recognise that Māori home ownership is lower than the general population. So through recognising that, we've made the conscious decision to focus more on the person's capability and the opportunities or options within that business to repay what they're asking for. So there's a much larger focus on, okay, how long has this person been in this industry and or people? What does their wider ecosystem look like in terms of their household, their whānau, and how is that going to support? What financial data is available and what financial data isn't available. So,
could you explain that for us, and how sometimes it's more difficult for Māori whānau to tick all the boxes in the spreadsheets and put all the numbers in around cash flow and assets, and do what you'd consider normal? Go to the accountant, get them to fill it all in, and come back with a bill. How does that? Where are the differences?
Yeah, so you've sort of just hit it on the head in terms of the bill that you'd get from the accountant, right? For a set of projections that most of the time is actually completed by the customer. So, for us, it's about recognizing that and understanding that actually the information that customers are telling us is credible. And how do we go about relying on that information in our loan assessments?
One of the other things you do is unsecured lending in a traditional sense. We've been talking about this, the bank's always asking for the title and the mortgage on the freehold land. So one way to get around that is to have unsecured lending. Can you explain how that works if you wanted to build a business or start a business, how you could do that, maybe without the title and the mortgage?
Yeah, so one of the major barriers to entry is the cost of setting up a business, right? And if the bank's asking you to go away and get 2 years worth of projections and a business plan, that does come at a cost. And for some of our businesses, that may reflect exactly what they're trying to borrow. So, Kiwibank's looking at ways in which we can actually trust the information that the customer is providing us, where there is only 1 year worth of financial information available, actually just recognizing that and saying, this is what we have to work with. Obviously, if there's more, then that makes the application a lot more credible. But just through understanding where different people are in their business ownership journey and how we can go about enabling that to thrive is really important.
And that must mean banks and bankers have to have some different skills, because one of the trends we've seen in banking globally, but also here over the years, is that more and more of the lending decision processes have become much more about the hard data and the automatic decisions and the box ticking than it has been about two people sitting down in a room having a chat about their dreams and how clever and ambitious they are, and essentially deciding after meeting someone and seeing some data and understanding, where they've come from and their connections to the rest of society, deciding this person is someone I want to back. Our banking systems, our banking IT systems, the way that everything has become automated has put a lot more weight on the hard data in automated structural form. It's obviously much cheaper for a bank. They can code it up so that it's automated. No need for humans. It's great. But this sounds a bit more expensive and difficult and more nuanced for a bank to do. How has Kiwibank adjusted to that?
Yeah, there's two streams that I sort of look at answering that question in, right? Because some people really love using technology. And so within enabling more Māori businesses to access business lending, we have had a focus on our online tools and try to make those more streamlined and make sure they're asking the right questions and seeking the right type of data to ensure that our Māori customers can have real opportunity when applying through those channels. And coincidentally, out of the changes we've made, we've seen an increase in applications by 60% and first touch approvals by 10%, which I think is a huge success. Looking at the other side, which is that human touch, that human element that a lot of customers tell us that they want. People actually approach the bank wanting to tell the bank about what the opportunity is, about where their background is, and so on. And so for us, it's about ensuring that our policy settings reflect that. Right? And some of the anecdotal feedback that we've had from our credit managers is actually our frontline team are able to put the more vanilla stuff through a lot easier. And now they're actually having a much more robust or harder conversations with the credit team, which mean that actually they're taking the right time, the right effort, and having the right types of conversations with those businesses that have huge opportunity.
One of the ways I like to look at the world, and maybe this is because I did accounting and trained in economics, and I'm broken in that way, but is that I think about capitals. I think about financial capital, social capital, intellectual capital, and I've come to realise that idea of capital is often intergenerational. And that the Western English way of looking at the world, which is if I own capital, I'm the one responsible for it and I deserve it and I own it as a human being. It didn't exist before I came along. It's all mine. Whereas actually I've come to reflect on, for example, my personal capital, which is, I grew up on a farm, but I would have had a completely different life if my grandfather hadn't been given that land by the state, or I hadn't been subsidised in education, which I know I had access to, but not necessarily my Māori mates had access to in my small town that I was in. So I've come to realise that actually a lot of the capital I have, the intellectual, the social, the financial capital, came from past generations and decisions made in past generations. Could you give us a sense of, how some acts of parliament and some practices have combined into, a deficit, a blockage to those intellectual, financial, social capitals that I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's part of understanding actually what those blockers are for Māori accessing business lending. We really had to take a deep view into the past as a bank and understand the things. There are some aspects of history that have played out to really impact Māori in present day. You mentioned land being given to soldiers post World War II, and then before that, raupatu, the theft and trade of Māori land by colonial forces, and then we've also got parliamentary legislation that was put in place to really demean the ability of Māori to hold their knowledge systems. So when I say that,
the Tohu Suppression Act in particular, yeah.
When I say that, I'm referring to the Tohunga Suppression Act, which really stripped away or tried to strip away a huge knowledge system of Te Ao Māori to be replaced by really Western ideologies and way of thinking. But just on the Tohunga Suppression Act, it didn't only strip away those knowledge systems, it also stripped away the place or the person within a community that Māori would go to seek advice. They were the trusted in these present days, it'd be, your financial advisor, but they would give you the wisdom that they've collected over time based on the Māori knowledge systems. And so, fast forward to today, where is it that Māori are meant to go and seek that advice from? Is it the colonial system that was put in place, i.e. the bank or the government? And would that
maybe
have,
the trust isn't there to do that.
Well, would that have looked really different if we still had maintained those tohunga, those ariki, those rangatira within our communities who spoke like us, thought like us, and saw the world as we do, to be able to get that mātauranga, that knowledge from. And then we move sort of more closer in history around Māori schooling, right? And the fact that a lot of our past generations were taught how to be good labourers, how to be good housewives, how to be good servants, versus European schools who were taught arithmetic, economics, Spanish, things that would really enable non-Māori to get those much larger, higher paying jobs to then, again, use that money towards purchasing land assets and other assets to build their wealth.
But that would, if you took that to the extremes, you would think, well, there isn't much social, financial, cultural capital to work with to grow. But actually, that's not the case. When you look at the scale of the Māori economy, it is billions and billions of dollars, much of it in financial assets, a lot of it in land, but actually the people, when you look at the demographics of Aotearoa, the fastest growing, youngest, most productive age group are overrepresented by Māori and growing. And there is a huge amount of opportunity, if you can get it right in the banking system, to amplify that. Could you talk about, the opportunities there?
The median age for Māori is about 27. So there's a lot of young Māori who have come through the more recent schooling systems, have started out their career, potentially starting whānau of their own, and have some really, really strong skills in their chosen profession that don't have the backing of the bank of mum and dad or their own property to leverage against, to go out and expand their wings in their own venture. And so the opportunity here is, how can we flip the traditional nature of, education, home ownership, and business ownership? How can we flip it to actually the business is the opportunity to increase household income towards buying a house? As we know, household prices have increased over the recent decade. So that's the huge opportunity that Kiwibank has seen to be able to enable those to grow their idea into a business, their side hustle into a main stream of income, their second stream of income into a third stream of income, through, again, just recognising low Māori home ownership rates, the view of kaitakitanga versus ownership, and just really recognising that different economic structures for different ethnicities and cultures does exist, and seeing that as a strength.
That's right, because if you were a business strategist and you were looking for a juicy market to go after, the one where the median age is 27, where the fertility rate is significantly higher, and where you often have bigger connections to the local communities and to the land, and maybe a higher willingness to stay and to build assets in the long run, rather than, get some quick skills, get some quick assets and jump off overseas or whatever. That would normally be, a really sweet spot for a whole bunch of large businesses to go, huge opportunity here, young, fast-growing, solid and well-connected community. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, you would think so, right? The reality is, with risk-weighted assets set out by the Reserve Bank, it's a lot more expensive capital-wise to lend unsecured than it is to lend on a secured basis. So what we find is that, a lot of our industry focus on quarters, they focus on annual financial years, and really trying to extract the most value that we can in that short period. When we're going through this Māori access to business lending work, we recognise that actually if we show up when a customer really needs us at the beginning, or at the critical point of growth, actually, they're going to be a customer who is going to trust us, rely on us, and want to do business with us over the long term. So, of the businesses that we engage with, if a proportion of them come back and borrow significantly more money for future endeavours, another business and so on, actually that provides us with really strong sustainable revenue over the long term, many years. But then from a cultural perspective, if you recognise that Māori move in groups. So if I set up a business and I have a really strong relationship with Kiwibank, then I'm actually going to go and tell all of my friends and whānau about that. They're all going to be relatively the same age, relatively the same skill sets as me. And so, they're going to then want to join the bank that represents the needs of Māori and the Māori economy better than any other bank. And I think the real key message here is that actually, although we've looked at these changes in the historical context around the needs of Māori, actually all of our policy changes and the way that we operate as a business is available to all Kiwi.
And in many ways, that's one of the biggest problems Aotearoa has generally, that there are so many ideas, bits of enthusiasm, great pieces of technology, skills that humans have. But the way our banking system has become a bunch of mortgages with a few bits tied on is strangling the future of the country. If you can find a way out of that, then we make some progress. Teaho Pihama, the head of Māori advisory for Kiwibank. Kia ora for coming into the Spinoff for When the Facts Change.
Kia ora.